Export Solutions, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, which is going to focus on export control reform. We do have a full house today in terms of number of attendees. I know a lot of people are already on the call, and we have a lot more joining. So we're going to spend the first few minutes of this session just briefly going over some housekeeping items about how this webinar will run and how we'll handle questions and slides and things like that. And then I will introduce our speaker today, who is Ray Castagnero, and we'll turn it over to him and go from there. I hope you're all having a good day, and we thank you for joining this session today. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things as we move forward. You know, hopefully you can all hear my voice and see these slides, but basically, each of you, when you registered, received an email from GoToWebinar. You'll need to go back to that email, click the link, and it will then launch the application on your desktop. Sometimes we have companies that have firewall issues and various things like that. And if you run into that and want to message us during the session, we can try to help you resolve those offline while the webinar is going on. But if you can see the slides but can't hear the voice or anything, we put our phone number and access code up here so that you can dial in. During the session, just for ease of making this work well, and with so many people on the phone, we're going to keep everyone muted. It's just easier that way. And then the way we will handle questions is if you do have a question that you would like to address, and bring that forward through the question toolbox or the chat feature on the GoToWebinar panel that's on your desktop. And then at the end of the session, we will address those questions. We do want to get through as many questions as we can, but we also want to be mindful of your time. So if we run up against the 2:30 Eastern Time stop point, we will stop the webinar at that point. And if there are any unanswered questions, we can follow up with you offline to try to address those and help you out. One of the questions that we get asked in every one of these sessions and that we like to address up front is, will we get a copy of the slides? And the answer is yes, you can have a copy of these slides. Basically, within a week of this session, if you go to the link that's shown on our screen right now, which is exportsolutionsinc.com/contact-us/webinar sign-up, you will see a section called Archived Webinars. If you look under there, again, within about a week from today, you will see the feature that will allow you to download a copy of the slides that are being presented. And then in addition to that, we are also recording this session. So all of the audio is being recorded and the slides are being recorded as we go through this. We will post that recording on our website as well. And you are free to go back and share that recording with colleagues and other employees in your company as needed. The only caveat we put on here is that we ask that you not transfer, sell, or otherwise distribute the recording or the slides to any other person without our permission outside of your company. So it's for internal company purposes only. We do host a series of free webinars throughout the year. Right now, I think we're doing one a quarter, so we have 4 webinars total slotted for this year, and this is our second one. If you enjoy these and find them informative, I'd like to invite you to register now for our next webinar, which will be on September 9th. This webinar is called The Best Webinar You'll Ever Attend About Export Control. And we really feel like that's an accurate title for 2 reasons. Number one, because it's free and we don't charge you for it. So that's a good reason to make it the best one. And also, more seriously, we've been doing these for almost 5 years now. And this is our longest running session and always our most highly rated and most popular session. For anybody that's on the call who doesn't know what ITAR stands for, doesn't understand the EAR, you call it EAR instead of the EAR, anybody like that who is just getting into the regulations and really needs a good primer starter course, I would recommend that you attend this webinar. We've had hundreds of people go through it, and it really starts at ground level and builds up from there. So it's a very good starter introduction to export control reform, again, for people who are not familiar with it. So go ahead and register for that if you haven't already, and if you want to share that with anybody else who may be interested, we would love to have you join us on September 9th. Now I'd like to go ahead and introduce Ray Castanero, who's going to be today's presenter, and Ray's going to be talking through a very popular topic today, which is all about export control reform. Many of you may be familiar that this process started several years ago with President Obama's Export Control Reform Initiative. It's been a relatively slow process, at least at the beginning, but in recent months and years, things have really started to pick up, and a lot of changes have been happening, particularly with the United States munitions list being revised. So Ray's going to go and provide an update on some of those more recent changes and export control reform in general. Just to give you a little bit of background about Ray, he has nearly 30 years of experience in trade compliance and also in contract compliance across a variety of roles. He's a subject matter expert in ITAR, EAR, OFAC, NAFTA, and BATFE regulations, and he's also an expert in FAR and DFAR supplements for government contracting. Just some of Ray's core competencies and expertise includes training for executives and employees, helping companies create or revise their export compliance processes and procedures, putting corrective action plans in place and conducting compliance audits, working with companies on voluntary disclosure, and also helping companies with their international outsourcing. Ray's background includes working for some of the leading manufacturers of a variety of technical products and services over the course of his career. Some of those industries include aircraft, infrared technology, night vision, targeting and surveillance systems, and Ray does maintain an active secret security clearance, a top secret security clearance. In addition to all that, which is very impressive and worthwhile, Ray has also served in the past in the United States Air Force as a fighter jet pilot, flying a variety of fighter aircraft. And he completed his military career by retiring from honorable service as a lieutenant colonel in 2003, and so we thank him for that service. And if you ever want to hear some good war stories, he has plenty to share in that regard. And finally, in 2014, Ray accepted a commission in the State Military Forces of Texas as air component as a colonel, and he lives in North Richland Hills, Texas, just outside of Dallas. So, Ray, are you on the phone?
I am, Tom.
All right, thank you.
Okay, welcome everybody. Good afternoon for those in those time zones, and anyone on the West Coast, I guess it's still good morning for you. Okay, we're going to dive right into this. A little bit about the Export Control Reform Initiative. It was put forward and approved by the President in 2010. There's been talk about export control reform probably since the 80s. And through everybody, presidents and Congresses and everything, it just never really gained traction until starting in 2010. So we're welcoming it with open arms. It's a little bit complicated, and you'll see. Hopefully, we'll get through some of the complication for you today. But overall, it's putting things heading in the correct direction as far as export compliance is concerned. The ultimate goal, we're not there yet, is to have one licensing agency to process and adjudicate all licenses that are currently processed by the Departments of State, Commerce, and Treasury. So at some point, it's going to be one ring to rule them all. It's probably going to be maybe another 10-year process to get there. The idea is also the concept to have a one-tiered control list based on the sensitivity of the items. To have one system for submission review and adjudication of licenses. And basically, there's a schedule the DoD put together with when the go-live dates are going to be for these things. And I have a chart with some of those dates on it. So when we publish the slides for this, you can go ahead and copy it off of that at that time. There's no need to try to write everything down during the seminar. You will have copies. There's going to be at some point one export enforcement agency, and believe it or not, it's going to be handed over to a new department or coordination center at Homeland Security. So that's how they're going to be handling it. The approach basically has three phases. The first is to make immediate improvements and to create the framework from which all the other changes will be made. Then to implement that framework within existing agency structure, and then to complete the transition through consolidation of the various agencies and their jurisdictions. Okay, the way the rules came about, the DoD led a review of the U.S. munitions list, USML of the ITAR, International Traffic in Arms Regulations. Where it used to be kind of a nebulous cloud of items in each category, they decided to go with positive lists that say these things are covered under this category, so that you know by elimination which are not. They started with categories 7 and 8. Those are the first ones, basically ground vehicles and aircraft. They figured those are were the ones in the need of most reform, and so those are the ones they started with. And there's up to 4 categories that have been or are in the process of being changed right now. It did require congressional notification and consent of the under Section 38F of the Arms Export Control Act. So Congress is involved in this. It's a full governmental effort, and so it's not unilateral at all. It's everybody was in agreement, and that's probably why it took so long to get it going. But at least we have something that all branches of the government are involved in, or at least have given a head nod to. Okay, in 2010, the State Department proposed what the rules were going to be for military vehicles, Category 7, and that those changes and how that was going to be handled was going to be used as the framework or example of how the process is going to go for all future proposed rules. I guess they felt that the difference between ground vehicle, military vehicles, between tanks and armored cars and Humvees and unarmored vehicles, whatever, was much more clear and distinct in that category. So that's why they went with that. They figured it would be cleaner, easier to do, and harder to make mistakes, and then they would build on that. So for once the Congress approved everything, both the Commerce Department and the State Department published their final rules. They came up with the concept that any military vehicle is specially designed, and that's in quotes, meaning it actually has an actual written definition in the regulations. So anytime you see something in quotes in the regulations, it means you can look them up and see exactly what is meant by it. So any military vehicle specially designed, parts, components, accessories, etc., and related technology, anything that is not on the U.S. munitions list of the ITAR anymore, that's been removed from it by the rewrite, is now moved to the commerce munitions list, and that's a new term for many people, unless you're involved in export control reform. And we'll talk about a little bit what that is. So as we said, Category 11 was done in early 2012. 12 is now currently in a public comment period until July, so the 60 days is running out for public comments on that one. We'll talk a little bit about that. And the Category 15 is scheduled to be completed. The efforts of it started last November 2014, and it's supposed to be completed by November in 2016. So that will be, and that's space vehicles, by the way. Okay, the DoD reviewed the U.S. munitions list, and this is what, this is still the kind of their mission statement, if you will, that they want to protect our military edge, to make sure that our warfighters have the best and that the enemy can't exploit those things, to build partnership capability with our allies and partners, to increase cooperation and collaboration. So some things have been made a little bit freer between certain strategic trade partners, etc., and to enhance and improve the enforcement, monitoring, and intelligence capabilities of the United States. And this, of course, is to deny exports to countries and entities of concern. So all of that right there is really not much of a change from the way the ITAR and the EAR, most of the ITAR have been, but they codified it and made it absolutely certain that these are still our priorities. I guess the partnership part in the middle is relatively new. We have treaties with the United Kingdom and Australia now that there are exemptions to licenses based upon treaties. So that middle part there is a sort of I guess a 21st century invention. Okay, the new rule is to move items from the U.S. munitions list to the commerce control list of the EAR, and essentially that first statement there explains how it was published and when in the Federal Register, and that's what it's called. The control of items the President determines no longer warrant control under the U.S. munitions list. Okay, as we said, it establishes a framework to move less sensitive military end items from the USML to the CCL that don't fit into an existing ECCN in the EAR, and basically controlled for more than just anti-terrorism controls. So that's one of the goals there. primary categories have changed. There are 4 of them. 5 if you count the first line as being 2, but basically they established the new 600 series and 500 series of ECCNs. They did not exist before export control reform. They created a ECCN 0Y521, which for those of you familiar with the ITAR, it's kind of similar to the category 21, which is a catch-all category for emerging technology that maybe hasn't been thought of or categorized before. It proposes a single definition for the words specially designed and additional definitions. In writing, they're almost identical. A few minor changes between the ITAR and the ER definitions, but that's mostly just the way they interpret language and the reasons for controls that they use. But essentially, specially designed is well defined now. And then there's some other changes to assist in the structural alignment of the U.S. munitions list and the commerce control list. And they do refer back and forth to one another quite a bit now. Okay, I mentioned a little bit the commerce munitions list. This is kind of a new entity based on the Boston Arrangement Munitions List, WAML, or WAML. And existing ECCN that starts with whatever numbers, 0 through 9, Y018, those items will be moved to the 600 series to create and combine Boston list items with former U.S. munitions list to create the new commerce munitions list structure. And this CML replaces the concept of dual use with items of export to capture all items subject to the EAR, which means there are actually military use items now in the commerce list, in the commerce munitions list. They're actually referred to as military aircraft that are not controlled by the USML. So those are really not true dual use anymore. So the term dual use is being sort of sharing the spotlight now with this commerce munitions list. It's still meant to include most dual use items, most commercial items, and certain munitions items that were listed by Vossner under the 600 series, and any ECCNs in 018, and also the ECCN for 0A919. If this is kind of, a blur to some people, you'll kind of see where these numbers come from in a few slides from now. But it sounds complicated. It probably is, but overall, it's probably better for business, especially for defense items that aren't quite as sensitive if you manufacture or export those. And of course, you're going to see the phrase a lot: parts, components, and accessories and attachments not enumerated on the revised U.S. munitions list. And that's a very key phrase there, not enumerated. The ITAR has been, and the parts that have not been rewritten still are, very vague as far as what they control. Not too many things were specifically enumerated in the list, and I'll show you some examples of how they are now enumerated. So it's very, very easy to say, well, if they're not enumerated in this ITAR list, then I go over to the CML and find the items there. And it's there's a pretty firm line between the two now, where it used to be very, very blurred. And there are new ECNs created under each category. There's the format for it. X is for category, Y is for group in that example, and ZZ responds to the Boston munitions list categories for easier tracking. That's kind of a cooperation with the rest of the world, or at least the rest of our allies anyway in the world. So it's keeping in line with that. Okay, a little more on the CML. And items will generally be controlled for national security, column 1, regional stability, also column 1, and the column 1 of anti-terrorism, and then any UN embargo controls. So those are still there, and that's what they're trying to limit it to. Let's see, a license will still be required for the export or re-export of all countries except Canada. Canada has always had a special relationship with the United States with regard to export compliance, and that is certainly kept up here and probably strengthened a bit. They are our strongest strategic trading partner, as well as our closest ally, certainly in this hemisphere, if not in the whole world. And so Canada is going to reap some of the benefits of this export compliance reform. So certain items that are controlled for missile technology and other reasons are going to be excluded from this not requiring a license, but that will be delineated, when you look up the ECCN for one of these items. We can apply, however, strategic trade authorization through license application process. The Bureau of Industry Security of the Commerce Department will publish those end items, and items controlled for missile technology reasons will not be eligible for this procedure. So there's still, it's interesting that the things that used to be controlled by the ITAR are being controlled very similarly by the Commerce Department. So when we talked about one agency at some point is eventually going to be over all of this, you could probably see the handwriting on the walls and see which agency that's going to be. It's probably going to be Commerce. And then, of course, any items that are assigned to ECCNs that exist are going to retain the reasons for control of that ECCN. And licensing review policy, there's a general policy of denial for any country under a U.S. arms embargo, and BIS will publish a list of countries in a proposed change to the 740 section under .2A12. So that's where you always want to keep up with the latest and greatest. I advise people not even to bother using paper copies of the regulations anymore because they change so quickly. They're so easily available electronically. You can download them. And as a matter of fact, even if I know that a version of something came out in January of 2015, before I start copying and quoting chapter and verse from it to somebody, I always check to make sure the one I'm using is the latest and greatest. Because every once in a while they'll pop a change in on you in May or something, and you don't want to be using a document that was overridden, you know, a week before or something. So I use electronic copies, and to me that's just a good technique for people to use. Okay, we mentioned the 600 series. It's for restrictions on the use of license exemption, certainly. And essentially the limited value shipments, temporary servicing replacement, et cetera, that's RPL, government, and strategic trade authorization are available only after submissions of a license exception under STA. So those things are getting kind of more intertwined with one another. And luckily, these things, you know, you look at them as you kind of standalone ECCNs. When you look in there, if something has a 600 series ECCN, the exceptions will be delineated for that item. And I just go from, I don't try to memorize everything in the 600 series has these things or whatever. I take them each time I classify something or I'm dealing with something. I go ahead and look at what the exceptions, et cetera, are, and I work with it pretty much from scratch each time, and that's where you keep yourself out of trouble. For parts, components, and accessories and attachments for 600 series items, no prior approval is required for limited value, temporary replacement, government, and strategic trade. So that's good. So they're really looking at the heavier controls on the whole item itself rather than its parts, components, and accessories. And that's a fairly substantial change there that should make doing business in these type of items a bit easier. And software and technology still has technology software unrestricted, the STA and government exceptions available. So in all these cases, government is applicable only to the 36 countries that are listed in the strategic trade authorization. And that's important to know because STA does not apply to every country. It's our allied countries. And hopefully, I believe that part of the logic behind this is that countries who want to trade with us will want to become one of those STA countries. So you may see that list increasing or changing in number in the future. That's just the way government does business and the way governments do business with one another. There is a new Part 743.4 of the EAR and a semi-annual reporting requirements for convention arms exports, so keep that aware. New red flags, one referring to a strategic trade authorization and one referring to the 600 series has been added to alert exporters, I should say exporters, of additional due diligence requirements. So one of the fears, if you will, that the State Department had, or DVTC had, was that when these things started getting moved over to the Commerce Department, are they going to be as vigilant and stringent in enforcing the rules? The answers seem to be yes, that they are. Commerce Department is taking this very, very seriously, and the State Department, who has really wanted to get rid of their control over exporting and temporary importing, is probably breathing a little bit easier, and they probably keep their fingers crossed that the Commerce Department is going to is going to be as diligent as they were. So it's a really strong cooperation between the two. There are some de minimis level changes for the 600 series. Tightened up, actually. The new rule establishes a more restrictive 10% de minimis level. And for commerce munitions with 600 series items incorporated to foreign-made items, it's applicable to the ECCNs you see there. The X is obviously being placeholders for numbers 0 through 9, but it'll be 10% de minimis rather than 25%. So yeah, a smaller amount of U.S. content will trigger controls. That's an important thing to know. And de minimis is determined by value, not by size or weight or any other restriction. So if you have a very, very small microchip that's very, very expensive, it's going to increase the U.S. content in something. It's always been that way, but now the cutoff is at 10% rather than 25%. Okay, I talked quite a bit about specially designed being very, very important. It's pretty much one definition that applies to 600 series ECCNs. Any existing ECCNs that use the term, and any of the revised U.S. munitions list categories that use the term. Interesting to note that some places, of course, that have not been rewritten in the ITAR for export control reforms, have not been rewritten yet. That is, still use the word specifically designed, and they're trying to get away from specifically designed because specifically designed was not defined. It was a very, very vague, subject to interpretation thing. So you'll only see the words specially designed in quotes in the parts of both regulations that have been rewritten due to export control reform. 3 notes have been added to the definition. 3 notes have been added to exclusions with it, and there are some other definitions that have been embedded within it. For instance, 600 series accessories, attachments, components, end items, etc., have been defined in there. And it also clarifies materials as it applies to product groups in A and C of the ECCN. Okay, the new definition of specially designed has kind of a 2-part A and B catch and release structure. Part A catches items that are specially designed, meaning that they would be considered specially designed for military, therefore under the ITAR. Part B, though, releases items from control under enumerated circumstances. They're very specific about what those circumstances are. The same definition in both the Commerce Control List and U.S. Munitions List. Slight wording differences, but essentially they don't contradict one another. It's just the kind of wording that they use and where they like to place the emphasis. Both USML and CCL sections that contain the term specifically designed only apply if any of the elements of Part A apply and none of the elements of Part B apply. So it's if it's caught, it'll be caught by one thing under A, and if it's released, it would be anything in Part B as well. Some release provisions require release supporting documentation. So be advised that if you're self-classifying something and using this catch and release structure, you want to document it very, very well. This way, if you did make a mistake, it's looked upon as a mistake, not a willful violation. So those kind of rules, those best practices will always still exist. Okay, here's the, and don't worry, I'm not going to read this whole chart to you, but this is the specially designed definition from Part 772 of the EAR. And you can see there's paragraph small letter A, and then there's B. So that's the whole catch and release thing. This is, I'm not going to go through it, but interesting to note that if you look down, let's say in subparagraph B4, if something was being developed with knowledge that it would be used with or commodities or software not enumerated in the CCL, if something's in production, it's not enumerated on either list, etc. These are circumstances that would release something from the specially designed definition. If it was or being used as a general purpose commodity with no knowledge for use in and of a particular commodity, such as a Hornet aircraft or a Humvee, that's also a release mechanism. So if you look at it, there's a lot. It's very, very wordy in the EAR, and for once you get to this point where you're already in the EAR, you probably pretty much realized that it has been released from the ITAR and you're already in the EAR. Another thing that's important to note is in both. This is in both definitions. Is subparagraph B2. If regardless of meeting any other criteria, if regardless of form and fit, if the item that you're trying to classify is a fastener, and that's designed as screw, bolts, nuts, nut plate, stud, insert, clips, rivets, pins, or any kind of washer, spacer, insulator, grommet, bushing, spring, wire, or solder, then it is released. It is not considered specially designed. Those items are considered minor common parts, and even if they're used on an F-22 or something like that, if it's a bolt or a nut or a rivet or something like that, it is going to be released from the definition of specially designed. So it'll be under commerce. And although it doesn't say it in here, I know from personal experience dealing with one of my clients that they purposely left bearings out of this. Even though companies that make bearings traditionally make bushings as well, and vice versa, this client was all excited that, hey, are these bearings that we make for missiles, are they released from specially designed? And the answer from the State Department was no, they're still controlled. So bearings they're conspicuously absent from this release definition. Now this is the ITAR version. It's a little bit smaller. This is what you would use to go through to decide if something is specially designed. And you see that as a result of development, it has specific peculiar properties that make it designed for a relevant U.S. munitions list paragraph. That's a catch. That means, okay, this is probably specially designed. If there's a part, component, or accessory that's used in or with the defense article, it's caught. So right now you've met so far under paragraph A, if you have something that has these military characteristics and it was intended for use in a defense article, you're looking at an ITAR item right now, specially designed. However, now you have to go to B, the release part. Is this item, regardless of meeting criterion A, is it subject to a commodity jurisdiction that has moved it to the Commerce Control List? If so, then right there you've been released. Again, if it's regardless of fit, form, or function, a fastener and any of those things, then that's a release point. It is not considered specially designed. If it has the same function, performance capabilities, or equivalent form or fit as a commodity or software that's used in or with a commodity that either was or is in production as opposed to development, and not enumerated on the U.S. munitions list, then you're released. So they've made it very, very clear with this catch and release system. And of course, if you know that development is that this item is going to be used in both defense articles and items that are not on the U.S. munitions list, that's almost by definition dual use, so that would also be a release. And of course, if it's a general purpose commodity, this is the same paragraph 5 that was in the EAR, with no knowledge of use in a particular commodity. We find a lot of our clients do business with companies in Israel, and the Israeli defense industry is very, very secretive about what things are going to be used in. So, you don't know what the end item is going to be. So if you have no reason to believe it's going to be used or designed to go into something purely military, it may be released upon that as well. Now, the good news here is if you go to that link on the DDTC site, you can see there are decision tree tools. Now, we're not going to go into them right here, but I would encourage you to go to that site and click on the specially designed, which is right underneath the words decision tree tools. And it's kind of neat because it's got all the words built into the paragraphs A, B, and all their subparagraphs. And you basically start with your item. What is it? It's a widget. And then it asks you yes and no questions about it. And as you get further into this yes and no question, you start getting places where you have an opportunity to say you don't know. Like, it would say, do you have knowledge that this is specifically or being designed for a military item? And let's say if your customer hasn't told you that, then you would just say, I don't know. And the I don't know questions will lead you to other questions. And eventually you'll get to a screen that says your item is not considered specially designed. Or it'll say your item is specially designed and is still under the jurisdiction of the ITAR. So it's pretty good. If you go to our blog site, we have a couple of articles about the specially designed decision tree tool, as well as the catch and release part of specially designed. So you can go to, you don't have to go any further than our own blog site for Export Solutions and read articles about these things that may be helpful to you. Okay, specially designed components in the 600 series are automatically eligible for STA, keeping in mind, of course, that is 36 countries only that are listed. And these are what we call special subparagraph X items would be components. And that's another thing is they've kind of the lettering system for what is the item and the various components underneath it have been really kind of made consistent now. So you've got subparagraphs X and Y, which is the next one down, will be insignificant parts and components. So they're getting very, very consistent with that. And of course, those items under subparagraph Y would have anti-terrorism controls only, of course, plus you wouldn't be able to send them to China for any kind of military end use. Okay, we're going to go through a few or a couple of the USML categories that have been or soon to be changed. I'm going to give you, I don't know if this would be a spoiler alert or something that'll to keep you from getting too intimidated, but a couple of the slides have copy and pasted entire sections, and we're not going to read through those. Some of it is just to prove the point, and you'll see this fairly quickly how that'll affect. Okay, so there you go. There's the export control reform implementation status. Those are the dates. Those are the Federal Register notices. They are hot links that you can go to, and you can find this. You can find this on the DDTC website. And I would, if you look at the USML category number going down the left column, you know, Roman numerals 1 through 21, find the one that one or ones that best represent what your business does, and then you can look over and see what the milestone dates are, and they're pretty much on that schedule there. Some of them are TBD because they're probably much more complicated, and like things like directed energy weapons, toxicological agents, and fire control sensors and night vision. So, although that one actually is in the TBDs there, I guess they don't know exactly when it's going to be complete, but that's the one I mentioned is in the 60-day review period now. So, we'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, as I said, ground vehicles, category 7 was the first one to, and it became the model or the template for the rest of them. The final revision of the U.S. munitions list positive list is incorporated into this rule. Once again, the positive list means things are enumerated as opposed to being hinted at or being very nebulous. They created 5 new ECCN entries for items that have moved from category 7 of the USML over to category 0 of the CCL. So you've got 0A 606, 0B 606, 0C, etc. All these, E, of course, 0E is for the technology that describes the items in the other A, B, and C, etc. If you look at any one of these 0A 606, 606, 600 series, that's what that means. So the last 2 digits may be different, but when you see a 6 in that place, that third placeholder, that means it's a 600 series item. And there's also been consolidation of 9A 018B into 0A 606B. So they moved a couple of things around within the CCL as well. I guess it's to make it easier to find things. And this change to category 7 definitely clarified which ground vehicles remain subject to the ITAR and which are subject to the EAR. They made that very, very clear now. And here's category 8 is the next one, which is aircraft. Now, if you look on the left side of the screen, you'll see former category 8A was described that way. If you look to the right, the new paragraph A under category 8 is very, very specific, where on the left-hand side it was kind of nebulous. It includes but not limited to. Words like not limited to made it very, very difficult to interpret these things. If you look on the right, the new revised rule, aircraft as follows: boom, bombers, fighters, fighter bombers with fixed-wing attack, turbofan or turbojet-powered trainers. That'll be like T-38s and T-6s and things. Attack helicopters. Once again, helicopters were always included in category A, but even utility helicopters were included. Well, now they're specifying attack helicopters. Unarmed military unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs. The press improperly likes to call them drones a lot, but they're not drones. They're much more sophisticated than that. And they have a range limitation that missile technology controls will be added to it if the unmanned aerial vehicle has a range equal to or greater than 300 kilometers. So they've actually put a range limit on it, and inside of that range, it's not considered to be a tied to missile technology control. If it's outside that range, it is. Any unarmed, unmanned aerial vehicles range equal to or greater than 300 has its own subparagraph. If you notice, these are all SME items with an asterisk, significant military equipment. So whatever rules are triggered by something being SME, it's a little more definitive now. And then, of course, you've got your intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance aircraft are included in this and very well defined in here. Anything that has to do with electronic warfare, air refueling aircraft, there's no civil purpose for those. Target drones, now those are actually drones because we shoot those down. And any aircraft incorporating any mission system controlled under the subchapter. So that's kind of a catch-all in here. But you can see it's very, very much more specific, and the types of aircraft controlled are enumerated. And this is the trend that's going towards all the different categories that are changing. When we talk about the components under Category 8, Category 8 has been revised to have a positive list of specific types of parts, components, accessories, and attachments that continue to warrant control. If you notice, we're in subparagraph H of the Category 8, parts, components, accessories, attachments, and equipment specially designed for, in red, the following U.S. origin aircraft. They're specific. You have the B-1, the B-2, the F-15 SE, FA-18, the later models, the F and G only, the F-22, the F-35, and any future variants thereof, or the F-117 or any U.S. government technology demonstrators. So right off the bat, you may say, the F-16, which is the most ubiquitous aircraft in the free world, is conspicuous by being missing from this. Earlier models of the F-15 are missing, and that is intentional. They figure they're ubiquitous enough where they're still controlled, but they're controlled under the commerce list. So it's just interesting, that, for instance, you're not going to see C-130s in here. C-130s are a transport. Unless you have an AC-130 where you've added weapons to it, it's going to be under the control 600 series under the EAR. So that's a pretty drastic change. And then there's a little note underneath the red writing, parts, components, and accessories, etc., of the F-15 SE and FA-18 EF and G models that are common to earlier models of these aircraft, like they didn't change that part of it, unless they're listed in paragraph H above, are subject to the EAR. So you've got early model of the FA-18 Hornet, F-15, early model F-15A, etc., are controlled by Commerce now, the components for them. And there's a special note here that it does not control parts, components, accessories that are common to aircraft enumerated in paragraph A, but are not identified in H1, and those identified in H1. So, for example, if you got something that's common to the F-14 and the F-35, it's not considered specially designed for purposes of the ITAR. The part common to only the F-22 and F-35, both aircraft that are enumerated in paragraph H1, then it would be specially designed. So if you've got some old components that were used on older aircraft, but they're also used on a newer one, they're going to be controlled by Commerce in the 600 series. The 600 series, the way it shakes out for military aircraft is Category 9, of course, is where aircraft are kept in the EAR. And military aircraft and related commodities, other than those enumerated in 9A, 991A, it will be under the catch-all of 9A, 610. Okay, so related controls of military aircraft and related articles that are enumerated in U.S. munitions list Category 8. Remember, listed later models of the F-18 and F-117, F-22, etc. Those are the ones that are enumerated. And technically related, directly related to them, are still subject to the ITAR. So they're being very specific as to which type of aircraft. And ECCN 0A919 is for controls on foreign-made military commodities that incorporate more than a de minimis amount of U.S. origin 600 series controlled content. Remember, the de minimis definition percentage has been lowered to 10% now, not 25%. This is where it comes into play. Under 9A610, subparagraphs A through W, you'll see specifically enumerated items, materials, parts, components, etc. And some of these items may be specially designed. Some may not meet the definition of that, so you have to use that decision tree tool. We talked a little bit about subparagraphs Y and Z for parts and components. So under 9A610Y, specifically enumerated parts, components, accessories that are specially designed will be under Y, but warrant no more than anti-terrorism controls will be under Y, and then X would be specially designed parts, etc., that are specially designed. That should be are not specially designed. Sorry, that's a typo. Okay, now this is one of those slides that I told you looks like an eye test or whatever. It's kind of hard to fit all this onto here, but I didn't want to truncate anything. But if you look at the comparison of it under ECCN 9A610, subparagraphs A, X, and Y, you'll see that A covers the military aircraft, X covers the parts, components, etc., and then Y is the remaining components. Okay, so let me see. One of the takeaways here is that if you look at Note 1, for purposes of paragraph A, the term military aircraft is also defined for you. It includes the following types of aircraft to the extent that they were specially designed for military use and are not enumerated in paragraph 8A. Remember, that's where we listed the B1, B2, F-15, SE, etc. Military trainer aircraft, cargo aircraft, utility fixed wing aircraft, military helicopters, not to include attack helicopters, of course, observation, military non-expansive balloons, and other lighter-than-air aircraft, and unarmed military aircraft, regardless of origin or designation. So that means they'd be under the 600 series 9A610 rather than under the ITAR. They're still going to be controlled, and you still may require BIS licenses, but they're not under control of the ITAR anymore. And aircraft with modifications made to incorporate safety for National Transportation Safety Board or FAA are not considered, if you modify them for safety, it doesn't mean that they're specially designed. Now, category 11, this one's looks like an eye test, and the takeaway from this slide is going to be pretty apparent. If you look at the left side of the screen, that is what category 11 had pretty much in its entirety, that whole column there. If you look at category 11 as revised, same paragraph numbers and things like that, but there's much more description. And as a matter of fact, the right side of the screen continues onto the next slide. This is all new. This has all been enumerated much more specifically under category 11, whereas I'll go back up to the previous slide. On the far left, that was as far as the entire category went, other than some notes. But category 11 on the right is very, very long and much more intensive. And that's pretty much the way this is going across the boards. Since electronics tend to be a lot more complicated than other things, that's why it's necessarily more complicated. Okay, when we're talking about electronics under ECCN 3A611, again, 600 series, it's described as electronic equipment and end items, etc., specially designed for military application that are not enumerated or otherwise described in either a USML category or another 600 series ECCN. So that's what paragraph A is there. List of items control. We're not going to go through this in great detail, but you can see there are related controls. For if you're an electronics engineer or electrical engineer, a lot of these things will make more sense to you. ASICs, PLD, programmable logic devices, etc. These things are all broken out, and it's very, 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 very specific. And that's why when you do a classification of items or reclassification of items under ECR, you need to get your technical people involved so that they can help you determine if something is or isn't under a certain subparagraph. And it goes on and on. You can see it's very, very, when they're talking about specially designed military application, the definitions are very, very specific. And subparagraph 7 talks about rad-hardened items specially designed. So these very, very complicated ECCN, but they did a really good job on it because you can go through, kind of ask yourself yes or no questions and pretty much figure out what your category is going to be, what your ECCN is going to be. Category 12 is the current one that's undergoing ECR changes. As I said earlier, we're still in the public comment period, but that's coming to an end rapidly. And I guess if you haven't known about it up until this point and haven't made public comments, you're probably not going to, or you're not going to have the chance to. And Category 12, this is the new Category 12, A through F, or you start with fire control, weapon sights, etc. Then you've got lasers and things. Category C is for infrared focal plane arrays. These are kind of night vision related camera devices, that what focal plane arrays are, IRFPAs. Any guidance navigation systems, components, parts, accessories of those, and then technical data and defense services. Those are the subparagraphs. They're trying to be consistent with the lettering of these subparagraphs, so that each category, like you kind of know that what's going to be in what subparagraph. Category 12A under fire control systems, and this originally, when I put these on the slides, I originally had like 10 slides here, and it was just it looked like that Category 11 slide earlier. So what I did is I kind of put it together in a nutshell, and essentially, since 12A is for fire control, weapon sights, aiming, imaging systems, and equipment as follows, and then there's a whole bunch of lists. I kind of consolidated that essentially if it involves weapon systems, positioning, aiming, targeting, electro-optics, infrared lasers, current or future generation, night vision, etc., it is still controlled by Category 12, B and C. So that's what the bottom line of it is. If it's weapony, if it aims things and makes things more accurate, it's going to remain under control under Category 12 of the ITAR. And then down further, 12E is parts, components, etc. It moved from a catch-all to a positive list, as we did with Category 7 and Category 8. It no longer controls generic parts, components, accessories. We talked about nuts, screws, bolts, fasteners. Well, the electronic equivalent of those, of these targeting systems, etc. There are generic parts within those as well. I don't know what those parts would be, but that's why I said you have to involve the technical people. Maybe circuit boards and diodes and things of that nature. There are 15 types of parts and components that are specified, and it will control specially designed parts and components. So Category 12 is still very, very viable, and it's just more of a positive list now. So if your components or your products fall into Category 12, you want to really look at it in detail to gather all the information you can from it. And then subparagraph F of 12 is still the technical data directly related to items A through E. It does not include basic operating instructions, testing results, incorporating infrared focal plane arrays into higher level assemblies not otherwise covered. So that used to be a very, very gray area that, just operating instructions, whatever, they're specifically saying it's not included under Category 12F. And of course, two new CCL ECCNs, 6A 611 and 6E 001. 6A, of course, being the systems themselves, 6E being the technology. And it's fairly complicated there. I'm just letting you know that the 600 series extends both to the items themselves, systems, etc., and also the technology. And then if you look at the reasons for control, it's national security, missile technology, nuclear proliferation or non-proliferation, I guess in this case, regional stability, crime control, anti-terrorism, and any UN sanctions. So that's a pretty strong laundry list. This, if nothing else, should let people know that the government did not slack off on licensing or restrictive requirements by moving things from the U.S. munitions list to the CCL. It's just, it's still controlled in many of the same ways, but it's controlled by Commerce Department instead of the State Department. Okay, when will the changes to this Category 12 be finalized? Okay, it's open for comment for about another week and a half. It was 60 days, but now it's less than a month remaining. Any constructive inputs accepted. Obviously, you don't want to just call in to complain that's going to wreck your business or whatever. So they're only accepting constructive input, and I guess it's very subjective. And then the final rule will be issued, and then in some later version of the ITAR and the AR, the category will be finalized. There'll be Federal Register notices all along the way to let you know what the status of this is. So you can look up under the Federal Registry do like Google searches for Category 12 changes, and you should be able to find it online. Okay, even though I said there's not a whole lot of time to submit public comments, these are the places where you would make those public comments, and that tells you what the subject line needs to be, and you notice it's different for the different agencies. Or you can do it by snail mail. Good luck with that. It's probably not the most efficient way to do it. I just see a note here that somebody lost phone audio. If you lost it and you have it back up now, please let us know. Category 15 is
we're still good as far as I can hear you, Ray. So I think we're still good.
Okay. Hopefully. Okay, that's good. Hopefully everybody can still hear. Category 15 is spacecraft and related articles. Many of you may be in the space business, and basically this is the proposed change. Spacecraft, including satellites and space vehicles, whether designated developmental, experimental, research, or scientific, are having a common civil or military end use, are still under Category 15A. Items affected by it will be commercial communication satellites, ones that are unclassified, of course, remote sensing satellites, spacecraft parts, components, etc., that are not specifically identified in the revised USML Category 15. All rad-hardened microelectronic microcircuits are going to be affected by the change. And other items are going to include ground control systems and training simulators specially designed, again, that definition for telemetry tracking and control of spacecraft. Planetary rovers, you see these things on the news all the time running around on Mars. Those are included in this. Planetary and interplanetary probes. Sounds like we're starting to get into Star Trek stuff here, but this is, it's the 21st century now, so we've got to update these categories to fit the real world or the real universe in this case. Anything on the International Space Station and parts, specially designed for the station, are included in this. And if there are space-related military functions, sophisticated sensors, certain satellite integration and launch services, and most types of manned spacecraft still remain on the U.S. munitions list. So if you can put a person in it, it's going to stay under the control of Category 15. Now, for spacecraft, they felt it necessary to create a new CCL series called the 500 series. Works pretty much the same as the 600 series. And you can see it's ECCNs with a 5 in the middle there, our 500 series. Actually, it should say same restrictions as 600 series. Sorry about that. So most 500 or 600 series items will require a license for anywhere except Canada, again. So for any Canadian people on there, give yourselves a round of applause. There's no de minimis exclusion for U.S. components. This is different than the other. If you recall, under 600, the de minimis exclusion went from 25% to 10%. Under 500 series, it is 0%. It's zero tolerance. So if there's even one tiny little bit of U.S. content in a Category 15 item, it is considered to be U.S. and under control of Category 15. And of course, you're going to see China interspersed throughout a lot of this stuff. So here's an example. If a foreign-made satellite contains even one U.S. origin component that is still classified as ECCN 9A515, such as a circuit board or something, microelectronic, that's listed in 9A515, it cannot be exported or re-exported to China. For those who have heard the phrase QRS-11, that involved a very, very sensitive microchip going to China. And a lot of people lost their jobs. A lot of companies were fined a great deal of money over it. So China, if you just listen to the news occasionally, you'll find out that we're getting a little less tolerant of one another rather than more tolerant. So the U.S. and China really are at odds with one another on these things. If your dream is to sell ITAR items to China, it's probably not going to happen in our lifetimes. Now, the 500 series ECCNs has been, I don't know if it's jokingly or whatever, but it's been referred to as the EAR see-through rule because it creates the same functional equivalent that the ITAR see-through rule has. And that'll be on the next slide. It promotes the use of the new strategic trade authorization and other EAR license exceptions available for certain exports of 500 series items. And there'll be a couple of slides from now. And it's intended to have and the word intended, just remember the word intended, okay? You know, the road to you-know-where is paved with good intentions. Okay, it was intended to have a positive impact on the ability of U.S. companies to export space-related products and services. But hold your applause on that because it's not that easy. Here's the ITAR see-through rule. It's a DDTC policy, of course. that foreign manufactured items are subject to U.S. re-export control restrictions when they contain U.S. origin content that's subject to the ITAR. Many situations where the defense articles do not lose their military character when incorporated into another item, such as machine guns or armor plates installed in a commercial truck. As applied by DDTC, the ITAR see-through rule applies regardless of whether the final end item has military characteristics and regardless of the percentage of U.S. content or the completed end item. So there's still no de minimis rule in ITAR. This is basically it was saying that if you could see through an item and see any U.S. content at all, and if it had an ITAR item, then it's still controlled by the ITAR. And it could limit, these are some of the limitations of it. It could require extensive DDTC licensing, which may or may not be approved, lots of provisos. It often led to lengthy shipping delays and impedes companies' ability to use upstream integrators and other necessary things. It can, now that there are space launch companies, all over the place, commercial companies, the see-through rule could have limited foreign launch destination options and prevent certain foreign end users from taking possession of what were otherwise commercial items. So the see-through rule was perceived as hurting a lot of people who were trying to get into the aerospace business or in the aerospace business. Now, we talked about licensing exception STA. That's where it was finally published. 36 allied countries we mentioned. It's for less sensitive items with national security controls only, to an additional 8 countries that weren't there before. So 36 is the increased number. There are some limitations. It's got to be destined for the ultimate end use by the armed forces, police, paramilitary, etc., of a government in one of the 36 countries. It's not applicable for encryption items. There are notification requirements. You must notify the consignee that you're using whatever the ECCN you're using, and that you're using this license exception STA. As with any exception, you have to put everyone on notice that you're using it. There's an additional factor. You have to obtain a statement from the consignee who's receiving it, acknowledging that they are a armed force, police, paramilitary, etc., of that country. So you want to make sure, and that's for the protection of your company and yourself. You want to make sure that they're acknowledging that they're eligible for STA. You want to send them a shipment notification prior. Let them know. I think email is probably an acceptable way to do that. But it's not just put it in the box, put the proper markings on it, and just send it to them. So they have to be expecting. It's kind of like sending someone registered mail. They have to, have knowledge that it's coming their way. And I guess implied in this is that they have to let you know that they received it, that it wasn't hijacked or waylaid someplace. It can't be used. It can be used for deemed exports. So, which is good. That's when you just, you're releasing some technology to somebody orally, without passing a drawing on or anything like that. But you can use the exception, but you have to keep track of it, and you must keep a log referencing all the applicable consignee statements. I would go so far as to say, if you're going to have a deemed export under STA, go ahead and log that telephone call or that meeting where you talked about it, because this stuff all needs to be auditable. Whenever you're using any exceptions to the EAR or exemptions to the ITAR, these things have to be logged and they are reportable. Here's some caveats to STA. And this is where we're getting into that not so fast about holding your applause thing. Nearly every other exception can't be used to export 500 series items to ITAR embargoed countries. So if somebody's embargoed, they're still embargoed. Be advised that many of our allies do not have embargoes against China and other countries embargoed by the U.S. You have to be cognizant of that. Any export compliance person will tell you, you have to know your end users, you have to know who your customers are, you have to know what the ultimate destination is. And if the country you're dealing with has no problem with sharing things with China, you might not be able to ship to them as well if you have reason to believe that they're going to re-export to China. It creates a gap that incentivizes foreign manufacturers to design out EAR 500 series items as they do ITAR articles today. And that's just the way people are trying to get around the see-through rule. In other words, I guess the summary here is that the very problem that was presented by the ITAR see-through rule that led foreign partners to try to do ITAR-free designs, it's now repeated through the implementation of the EAR see-through rule. So I don't know if it improved anything for anybody. I think it made it a little bit more complicated. So of all the export control reform initiatives, this is the one that probably did the least help to anybody, in my humble opinion. Okay, so during this ECR transition period, when all these different categories are being transitioned, what happens if you have existing DSP-5s and things like that? Well, the good news is that your DSP-5 licenses, your permanent export license, if you have them valid with what was at the time a valid ITAR category, you can continue to use them for up to 2 years after your category changes. So there's a kind of a grandfather clause for 2 years. You also have the ability to amend the licenses to remove the transitioned items. So if you have a whole bunch of ITAR categories on a license, and 2 of them have gone away now because they're now under control of the Commerce Department, you can go ahead and amend your license, especially if you got a brand new license and you just got it recently and you want it to still be valid for 4 years. It'd probably be worthwhile for you to amend it. Or if you can get all your business taken care of within the 2-year transition period, then you can continue to do that. Now, for transactions that happen after the effective date of the ECR reform to your category, et cetera, you have the option of obtaining a BIS license from the Commerce Department to use a license exception if one is available to you, or use the no license required designation when it's eligible. Generally speaking, if you're concerned about it, it's probably going to require a license. Or you can obtain a DDTC license agreement or other approval if you're eligible under 120.5b. So you have a couple of options here. Some of the best options are to make use of the 2-year transition period. But if you can't, you might have to get a BIS license, or you might have to get a TA or something to explain it. State Department DDTC has been very, very good with having TAAs that can contain both ITAR and EAR content. And as long as you explain that you know what the differences are and where the separation is, that you may get a proviso or two that tells you, what applies to what. But essentially, if you mix the two, I would say as recently as 3-4 years ago, you probably used to get a return without action on that license. They'd say, if you don't know the difference between these things, we're not going to tell you. So that's a positive thing, is you can have kind of a mixed TAA as long as you let them know that that you know what the difference is between commerce items and ITAR items. This is a chart that when you're able to download our presentation, if you are in a transitional period for ECR, you might want to print this one out and hang it up on your cubicle or office wall. But essentially, it describes the different kinds of DSP licenses, 5s, and then 61s and 73s, and then your agreements at the bottom. And it tells you that if that license or agreement contains only items transitioning to the CCL, and it describes how you can use them. If it contains both transitioning and non-transitioning items, it gives you your options as far as that's concerned. So I would use this chart. We're not going to go through it in gross detail, but essentially it's a handy-dandy way of explaining what I had on the previous slide for you, previous 2 slides. So that's probably a good thing to print out. 0A521 is a new placeholder mechanism for emerging technologies that have not been foreseen. Those of you familiar with the ITAR, USML Category 21, this is kind of the EAR version of Category 21. Okay, so we mentioned that emerging technologies that might otherwise be classified as EAR 99. That's the thing that the government's trying to protect here. They don't want you to say, oh, well, I can't find it enumerated in the EAR because it's just way too new. So I'm going to go ahead and call it EAR 99. That's the opposite of what the Commerce Department wants you to do. So that's why they're using 0A521. It gives the U.S. government 1 year to review and seek multilateral control where appropriate. So that they'll put it in that category until they figure out where else to put it. They may amend or append another category and say, okay, your 0A521 item is now in your 90 510 or something like that. They are going to create a table for items identified as positively as possible in a new supplement to Part 744. So that's where these things will be found when they the transition and decision period of using 0A521 is over. There'll be control for regional stability, column 1 reasons, and that would mean licenses are required to any country except Canada. Once again, yay Canada. I guess it's good to be Canadian these days. And then only the license exception for government shipments to STA countries, those 36 strategic trade partners, will be able to use the government exemptions to those countries. So it's still quite a bit limited. Once again, a big takeaway from all this ECR is that the DDTCs fear that that the government in general would lose control over exporting of sensitive items. The fact that if they handed it over to commerce, it would be, the wild, wild west. That's clearly not happening. The BIS is being very, very diligent in applying the types of controls that the State Department used to apply. Okay, best practices. We always like to include a little bit of those in these things. Essentially, you need to know your product's jurisdiction. You need to know your product's classification. Look at all those licenses and things you have that are during the transition plan, keeping in mind the 2-year grandfather periods, whether there's a mix of ITAR and now EAR, et cetera. Develop a transition plan. Put together a timeline chart. Treat it like a project in your company, how you're going to transition over the next couple of years due to ECR. And once again, if you have all these things, it's a best practice, because if you ever get audited, or if you ever have a disclosure to do, and then you get investigated, these kind of plans, these are the things that the government would want to see to show that you've done your due diligence and that you are taking reasonable care to obey the regulations. Once again, as I always advise clients, you would rather a disclosure item or a perceived violation be an administrative mistake rather than a systemic problem, or worse than that, turning a blind eye to the regulations. So your transition plan should be detailed, and you should be able to show it to somebody, and you should be auditable. Beware of any modifications to products that may, hey, it has a commodity jurisdiction and it's definitely been moved over to commerce, or ECR has moved it here. If you somewhere along the way modify it, you might have to look at it again, because you may have ventured into the catch part of specially designed again by modification. So just be wary of that. And of course, distinguishing between military and commercial product lines is always a good thing. I've done some audits for some of our client companies and found some very, very innovative ways people have to distinguish between what's ITAR and what's not. Some of them just use different colored paper. Everything that is not controlled, that can be seen by a foreign national, et cetera, is on plain white paper on the traveling documents that go through the shop. Well, they use blue paper for anything that's ITAR. And we walked through the shop, and I asked them to lend me a badge that would indicate that I was a foreign national. And we walked up, and sure enough, we went to various work areas. People would look over, see the badge was the wrong color, and flip the documents over, the blue page documents, so nobody could see what they were. I mean, these are all good things. You can be very, very creative with this stuff. But distinguishing so that your people in your shop and your office know what's military and what's not, what's ITAR and what is not. These are just really best practices that's going to keep the company. If it's not going to keep you completely out of trouble, it's certainly going to mitigate any trouble that you get into. I mean, your people are your greatest asset. I know that's a cliche, but it was never more true than it is in export compliance. Okay, questions. Tom already talked about the ground rules for the questions, sending them to us. Tom, would you like to make any concluding statements or correct anything?
Just want to say thank you. That was a lot of information, and we're trying to cover a lot in a short amount of time, so I appreciate the detail there. But as you guys know, this is a complex topic, so we will try to address questions as we can in the remaining time that we have. But if we can't get to it, please follow up with us offline, and we'll try to talk to you at that point. And again, just as a reminder, if you do have a question, there is a questions toolbar on your GoToMeeting panel that's on your computer screen. You can type the question in directly to us, and we will receive it. And there's also a chat feature. Either one of those would be a way to submit a question to us. So Ray, just some questions for you as we work through this. The first one here is, for contract purposes, Is it the responsibility of our clients to let us know if any data we may be accessing to perform our services is ITAR EAR regulated technical data? We are a 100% service provider. We don't manufacture anything, but we do have access to our clients' data.
Okay, that's a good question because it's a tricky question, and you know, oh, sorry about that. My microphone just cut off. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. The answer to this is, and I'll give you what the government answer is. The government's answer would be everybody is responsible. If your client or your client company provides you with ITAR restrictive markings or EAR, any kind of restrictive markings on their drawing specs, etc., and you have reason to believe that they're diligent about it, or you have no more knowledge to change those classifications or no reason to doubt them, use them. Just keep in mind that if you were to make an error, you want to make sure that your bases are covered. You want to make sure that you document that you receive these classifications from them. If they have a commodity jurisdiction number, they should certainly share that with you, and I would go online and look up that commodity jurisdiction to make sure it says what your client says it does. So you want to be diligent. You want to know your client. You want to know their items. We've come across a lot of things where some aerospace company or companies who is the customer of many of our clients just went through a period of time where they marked everything ITAR. They said, well, treat everything as ITAR. But then, of course, when they started complaining, hey, this stuff is too expensive, and our client companies are saying, well, we don't think it's ITAR. We could have this stuff manufactured in Mexico for you for half the price, but you called it ITAR, and we don't have a license, so we can't do it. So you can see that not all client companies apply the same diligence. So you really need to have a robust plan of your own how to deal with these things. If something looks like it shouldn't be ITAR, but they're calling it that, or worse, the opposite case, they're saying it's EAR 99, but you kind of think it's category 11 or something. You want to question it. You want to find out who classified it on their end and how they classified it. I found a lot of dead ends where people go, I don't know, it just says that on the drawings, we just left it there, and that's probably not the best way to go. So, you have to make business decisions as far as how much work you're going to put into these classifications, but it's very, very important, and really ignorance of it is probably not going to be much of an excuse. I hope that answers it to you, but it depends on who your client company is, really.
Great, thanks, Ray. Next question, is there a best practice that you know of for how to document specially designed analysis? So when someone goes through that decision tree or that tool, what's the best, do we know of any way that they should document that to prove that they've done that analysis?
Well, we're actually working on kind of a checklist for going through that. It's kind of the Q&A thing. And what I would say is, if you have a checklist that's based upon, you just start with the paragraphs A and B under the specially designed and turn those into fill in the blanks. And then even if you use the tool online electronically, just go ahead and write down or type in the answers that you get, when you did it, who did it, and if at the end you come to the conclusion that this is or is not specially designed, have that documented in writing. If you have an electronic parts database, I would scan that document and attach it to that part in your database, even if it turns out you're wrong. If you were diligent in how you got about it, that's going to be one of those, well, nice try administrative errors, but no, this item is specially designed. And those are the situations where the government gives you corrective action, but they don't fine you or put people in prison or the other crazy things that can happen. So, yeah, I mean, if you look at the way specially designed is written, it's fairly short and sweet. It fit on one slide, if you recall. I would just make those, questions to use. That's the way we would handle it for our clients, and that's what we're developing, is kind of a question and answer, catch and release document. And you would just fill it out, who did it, and scan it and put it into your part files, and maybe review those once a year or something like that. And that's about it.
That's a good idea. Thank you. Next question, do you know what changes are planned for guns and ammunition, if any?
Well, I could back up a couple of slides, try to find that. I have to look at the chart I had with the dates on it, see where Category 1 is in the mix. Mm-hmm. We do have clients that use Category 1. So, hang on. Just got to find that slide. Oops, there it is. Okay. See, all TBD. That's going to be a tough one. The answer to the question is a simple no. I don't know when, and I don't think anybody does right now. But I can tell you that the ones that have the TBDs next to them are probably not on the radar screen, if you know what I mean. The ones they've assigned dates to, those are the dates they're committed to. As we all know, TBDs, nobody commits to those. So it's going to be a while. It's going to be a while. I would anticipate that your Category 1 firearms type things are going to be controlled the way they are for quite some time.
Great, thanks. And another question about timing of changes. When will the final rule, I don't think we know this either yet, Ray, but when will the final rule be published for Category 12?
Yeah, no, we don't know specifically, but we know that the comment period is over, July 6th. And after that, I think what we've been seeing is I'm expecting something maybe by the end of the calendar year, that you may see the changes in the Federal Register in the November-December timeframe. This is just a guess by the way the other changes have gone, and you'll probably see it published in early January 2016. That would be my best guess, but again, it's a guess. You can't always second guess how fast or how slow the government's going to move.
Yeah, I would just add to that by saying, if you look at this chart here, and you can see the rules that have been transitioned, you think about like military electronics, first proposed in 14 and final in 16 as a 2-year window there. So sometimes it takes a while for the various things to go through those stages of proposal, and I've even seen some categories go through multiple versions of a proposed new rule, because they'll get feedback and then they'll propose a new rule, and they'll get feedback on that and propose a new one again. So.
Yeah, that certainly happened with Category 7, which was kind of the model for all this stuff. I remember comments going back and forth on that one for probably four years, maybe.
Yeah. Okay, here's another question. We import an item developed overseas for commercial purposes that appears specifically on the BIS ECCN, and it is used on the International Space Station. Must we log each conversation with the supplier, even when discussing non-technical data, terms and conditions, price, delivery, etc.?
No. The logs would be kept for deemed exports and things like price, schedule, delivery, which are purely business type discussions. Now you may want to log those for other business reasons, such as, hey, you promised us this delivery date in this phone call, but for today's discussion, no, you would not. You want to make sure that you log your technical conversations, anything that might be considered, in this case, a deemed export.
And then, just as a brief follow-on to that, they go on to say, would that change if we knew that the item was used for a Defense Department satellite?
Now, the answer, okay, when I say would that change, would the requirement to document price, schedule, delivery, et cetera, no, that wouldn't change. Mm-hmm. That would not change. But it's the technical part of it. Of course, if it's BIS type discussion, then you'd want to log it as, well, it's commerce under this ECCN, but this technical data was discussed. If it's under the ITAR, hopefully you have a license, and you want to document that as well. But the business aspects of the price, delivery, et cetera, general marketing information, no, that doesn't affect, you don't have to log that for export purposes.
Okay. Thanks, Ray. Here's another question. If a proposed rule will move our product onto the Commerce Control List, can we start using the new CCL classification prior to the final rule being published? No, you cannot. You have to wait till it's final rule. Tom touched upon it briefly a minute or so ago when he said that sometimes they have to create a new rule because the feedback they get changes things. There's a lot of things that they didn't consider when they wrote the original rule.
So no, you never want to anticipate, even though the Federal Register notices will look exactly like, like it's a page out of the ITAR and a page out of the EAR. You do not want to anticipate.
Okay, thank you. We have a couple other questions here about categories 1 and 2 in terms of what's going to be happening for them. And I would just say generally that I don't think we know the answer to that, and I'm not sure that anyone knows what proposed changes are going to be for firearms or ammunition at this point. Maybe somebody in the government knows, but as far as the research that we've done and what we've heard from everybody, those categories are not being addressed right now, and we don't know when they will be addressed.
That's true.
Okay, here's a true-false question for you, Ray.
Okay.
Very, very easy. One-word answer. True or false? If the hardware has moved to the CCL, is the related technical data technology also on the CCL?
True.
All right, there you go. That's the easiest answer of the day.
Yeah, I mean, if the person who wrote it wants to expound upon it, please let us know. But it is true. Generally speaking, the technology. No. In fact, as a rule, the technology that describes or defines an item is going to be in the same category as that item. So if it's category 8A, you can have a category 8I or something for the technology. Same thing with 0A 610 or 609 aircraft or whatever. Someplace in 0E is going to be the technology for that. There's no cross jurisdiction between the technology and the items themselves.
Okay, perfect. And with that, we are going to wrap this up. Ray, thanks again for the information. It was very informative and helpful. I appreciate all that you did to try to distill this down for everybody on the call. And thanks everyone for joining us on this session. Just as a reminder for you again, check back within a week on our website. You will be able to download a copy of these slides. We will also have a recording of this session available for you to view and listen to. I know a couple people had some audio problems that we were not able to resolve. I would tell you that if there were portions of this that you could not hear us, if you do go back and listen to that recording, you should be able to go back to those sections of the webinar and be able to hear what we were talking about at that time. So apologize for any of those technical issues that came up. But thanks everyone again for attending. Thanks Ray for hosting this session. We hope you all have a great rest of the week, and please join us for another webinar soon. Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody.